Awesome. And welcome to another episode of How to Make It in Toronto. Super excited for today's episode. Today, we're joined by John Elbing, Chief Storybuilder Building Officer and Storybuilding, a customer-centric approach that helps businesses clarify their message and connect with your audience. With a background in computer science, finance, and years of experience coaching startups around the world, John helps founders turn ideas into compelling stories. And his work is now a #1 international selling book. Welcome, John. How are you?
Hi, Carl. Happy to be here. So I hope I can help people make it in Toronto from all the way from Switzerland, since I'm in Geneva.
That's awesome, and I'm pretty sure I know you will be able to. So let's jump right in. And I'd love to start with, how do you define success for yourself, and how has that changed in the years?
So for a long time, I would change jobs every 2 years because I was bored, always wanted to do new things, I studied new things, and now I've been independent for 10 years and I change jobs every 2 hours, where I meet new teams, new projects, new people, interesting stories, from deep tech to humanitarian startups to companies in all different areas, and that's been great. And so by being independent, this isn't for everyone, but not having a boss, not having a team, being able to build my portfolio of all these different activities. I want to keep doing this as long as I can. So you might not see me, but I do have a sort of white beard, so I'm getting along in the years, and I think I've set up the perfect setup. Plus, I'm in love and happy, and so that's probably even more important.
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing, and I love that answer. Independence is always the goal, and to be able to do what you love as well, and get the opportunity to help a lot of people. So I think that is to me at least, that's one of the best answers to what success is, for sure. So let me ask you a little bit more about your background and how you got started. I know you were in computer science previously, but now you're as an entrepreneur running your own business. So how did you get to this point, and how did you get started into being an entrepreneur and building your own business?
So yeah, I started out as computer science. I probably haven't really programmed for almost 30 years now. So when I see what's been happening, I did my first vibe coding this week and created a little app with Claude and stuff. But that's a new thing.
Yeah.
And so once you're into programming, you get project management and team management and things like that. And then by chance, I got this change management project, that really gave me a different perspective. I went back and I did an MBA in finance, and I thought, ooh, finance, never again. But it did give me, this background. I did some startups that didn't work out, so I'm not a millionaire. And then so I went to work for digital marketing agencies, and somehow that combination of tech, finance, marketing, entrepreneurial experience, and all that, I got into coaching startups. I studied design thinking and all these methods and canvases with Post-its and things. And finally, I got into storytelling. And what I found about storytelling is that, yes, you build a story, but more than that, you force people to decide, who you're talking to, who you're not talking to, what's important, what's less important. And all this process really forces you to focus and define your positioning. And then I developed my own method where I added steps and created my own canvases and have this theory of the steps you go through when you encounter a brand, and that's the book you talked about. And so all these pieces sort of come together. And somehow, my company's name is Standpoint because it's so important to take the other one's standpoint. Empathy in business, you're always, it's always a person there. Even if you're doing some great, B2B thing, you're still working with people, and if you can tell their story, that's really powerful. So
Yeah.
that was a rambling answer. Hope that answered your question.
No, that was a fantastic answer, and I think it's interesting that you went through all the different experiences and have that amazingly technical background, but getting the chance to actually sit down and coach entrepreneurs and help them build their businesses, especially through storytelling, is I think one of the most important things you can be doing today, right? Everything is about storytelling. So
Yeah, that's great. No, I think that's storytelling is this buzzword that you hear all the time, and it can mean a lot of different things. And often it's sort of how to make your story cute and fun and things, but that sort of presupposes that you know what story to tell. And that's why I called it story building, because what I try to do is work on building the real story that you need to tell. And then, I almost stop at that stage. If you want to make it into a website or a pitch deck or something else, you can all go out and do that, and campaigns and ads and whatever. But the real thing is, what is that core story that defines your position, that engages your customers and things like that. So it's really interesting because I really talk at that foundational level with these companies. It's a lot of startups, but also companies of all different sizes, and that's the fun part. Then
yeah.
then you do it.
Sorry,
Yeah.
say that again. So sorry. Let me, because I love what your point here, and I wanted to ask is when you're meeting with a new startup, you're meeting with maybe a new founder. How do you go about understanding what story to tell, or how to build that specific story? Because let's say for me, here I am, on a podcast, and I'm fresh, and my ideas. I want to talk to entrepreneurs. But I'm not sure how to sell that story to them in regards to, I want to bring you in and help you learn, for example, whether it's your field, but also understand from other people who have built it, or who've built a business, or who've built a strong career. And so I'd love to understand your approach, and what do you think is important when building a story to be able to convey that message, to your audience?
So my shtick, or my take on this, is the idea that you're flipping the switch, flipping the script, and you're actually telling your customer story. It's not about, I'm the best and look how great we are and look what I'm doing. It's, I understand you. And so I find that when you encounter a brand, we go through 3 steps. And the first one, you have to recognize yourself in the brand. If I go on and I'm looking for a service and I'm not sure, is this for is this for big companies, small companies? I mean, who is this for? I'm a little bit lost. But if I landed on a website and it says, we specialize in services for independent consultants from Switzerland with a white beard and a fluffy cat, I'd think, ooh, that's interesting because they work with people like me. They understand. If you're a landscaper and you're looking for an accountant, and there's this one accountant that's specialized in landscapers, you'd think, okay, I mean, that's the one to go to. And I find often companies will start out by pounding their chest and saying, look how wonderful we are, instead of saying, so that first thing is, how can you describe your customer in the way where they'll recognize themselves? So you're out there talking to entrepreneurs of all different sorts, and so instead of saying, I'm here to teach you something, it's, as an entrepreneur, we struggle with these things. You're trying to get forward, but there's all this, something about where people say, yes, that's me in that stage. And then when you start talking about, what you actually deliver, that you've raised their interest.
Yeah, I love it.
So the idea is, so the second step is perception, where you have to really understand what the service or product is about, and clarity is better than cuteness, or and if I struggle and say, I'm not sure I understand what that is, well, you've lost me. And that companies are usually pretty good about talking about what they do, but there's probably a few things there too. And then often companies stop there, say, because you got it. And so if you want it, you click, and if you don't, you don't. But I feel that what happens there, I can be enthusiastic about your product or service, but then I'll say, well, yeah, but then so how do I buy it? And then are there hidden costs? And then how do I install it? And then, will it be hard to learn? And I'll have to use my old system at the same time in the new one. And how do I recycle? And all these little hesitations, and I can even sort of say, this is really for me, but I think I'll come back next week because, it's a little too much, and then I don't. So if you can accompany them into sort of this, how it's going to happen. You're going to avoid all these problems, and close your eyes and imagine the positive future that I promise. they'll be a few steps further in that engagement. So not only you get the right people coming in, you're not talking to random people. You're really talking to the people that, that you target, that you can serve the best. But then you get them to, to engage sort of in their mind, pre-live what you're going to offer. And that means when they engage, they're even, one step farther into that connection. So that's the kind of story you want to build, is to bring them along those steps in the most natural way possible. Sure, they'll be interested in to say, so what's your story? How big is your company? But they're only interested way farther down the line. Sort of, okay, I'm interested in their product. Now I'm going to look into who they are. So if you start by saying, we started on the garage and we're this and we got an award and stuff like that, and I don't know what you have to offer yet, I'm not interested yet. It's not that it's not important. It's just that we want to, check these boxes, and then we'll get there at some point.
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like, and I think that's usually, at least I can say I'm guilty of it, is you kind of just start off, as you're saying, as most entrepreneurs, is pounding your chest and being, well, I'm great at this, and this is what I do, before bringing someone, along for the ride and explaining it from their perspective and really understanding that. What do you think are some mistakes that brands make when they do that? In terms of the type of customers you do like to work with, when do they usually approach you in that story building, kind of along the steps? Is it usually larger brands that are just showing up who have already kind of defined it or defined their story, or people are more acknowledging? But I know you've mentioned startups, right? So in what stage do they come to you, or do you think what's a great stage for you to be able to come in and help them build that story that they can share with your audience?
So, of course, all the companies of the world would benefit from my incredible expertise. But what happens is, so maybe the ones that need it the most might not be the ones that actually work on it, because you have a successful company that's been going for decades, and you've always done it the same way, and you talk about your thing, and it sort of works. But you might not be getting the engagement that you deserve because of that. And so often what happens is it's at a pivotal moment in the company. So startups is pretty easy, because an early stage startup is trying to figure out, who is their ideal client and how do we talk to them? And, they're really open to that, that exercise. But bigger companies, either it's, they just came out of a merger and somehow the story doesn't quite match anymore, or they're going to launch a new kind of product or something, and they're trying to figure out what's the best way to launch it. Something's happening. I worked with the world leader of garden shears, and what happened is they have kind of different lines. Historically it was really these professional tools for real workers. And then little by little, they realized that a lot of the kind of gentleman gardener kind of types also liked it. And then they went into, motorized things. And so they had this catalog that was all a mix, where you had this heavy duty tool next to the one with the leather handles and the golden blades kind of. Yeah. So we really worked at saying, who are these people? And we came up with 3 stories so that their distributors and everything could target 3 different audiences with 3 different universes and 3 different, who you are, what you're trying to accomplish, what your challenges are, and how to bring it through, and to make that clearer. Sometimes the story, it's not only the best story, but it's a different story. I've worked with a company where we come up with a story and you think, oh, that's good, and then you think, yeah, that's how the competitors say it too. Yeah. And you sort of have to figure out what's the thing. I love this thing where I found this. There was a plumber in the States where his ad was, "We're on time." So he realized that people aren't worried that you're not a good plumber, but at least in the United States, this kind of contractor will either show up late or not show up at all. You sort of have to take a full day off of work just to get this plumber to fix your leaky faucet. Yeah. And so by saying, I recognize that, I get your worry, and I commit, to this, was really powerful. When everyone else is saying, look how good we are, and this idea of really, telling the the story, using the vocabulary, using the how the customer frames their issue makes a big difference.
I love that. I mean, that's such an interesting way of marketing yourself. We're on time because, as you're saying, is for people who've experienced it and has like had to take a day off and waited, that may be the most important thing rather than looking at the shiny frills, right? So I think that's such a great example.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask because I love, at least when certain brands do it really well. Is there any stories that have really kind of impressed you in terms of how a brand has presented itself? Like, for example, and then what I'm referring to is, for example, Nike and Jordan, right? How they're able to tell his story, but in some way able to create this brand and sell so much merchandise as they have, and to this point where he's not even playing, and it's probably still one of their most profitable brands. Is there a story that that you connect with really well, and that you feel has kind of helped you better understand certainly a product or the message that people are trying to share?
So, I'm all into storytelling, but that's not the end of the world. I mean, if you have a star that's the sort of that represents your brand, that can be very powerful in of itself, and the story sort of becomes implicit, sort of like, this is the kind of people that wear these kind of shoes, and I want to be that kind of person.
Yeah.
What I like about the other thing about Nike, I think a lot of sports brands are sports brands, and Nike is a little bit more than a sports brand. It's not run faster, it's just do it. And so there are people that, it's a kind of a sports brand and a lifestyle brand at the same time. So it's just do it. Everyone is at that thing to say, and it can be, I want to, get fit or run faster or, win the tournament. And it can be, I want to fit into the group. I want to seduce the girl or the boy or something. And it sort of catches that aspiration. And so when I say recognize yourself in a brand, there's, people will sort of, recognize that urge of, the just do it, and lean in to the brand.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, the different industries have different codes. There's this Patek Philippe that has, luxury stories are very different from other kind of stories. It's not about solving a problem or something. It's about, status or, group or something. And so they have this ad that is, you never own a Patek Philippe. You're just you just take care of it for the next generation. Sort of lean into this legacy thing, Yeah. And so people will sort of feel that they're building something for the the next generation. They want to leave a legacy, and that's part of it. And so they recognize themselves in that too.
Yeah. So in your career, obviously with your background and getting to tell stories, for example, what kind of skill sets and mindsets have helped you become a great storyteller? Again, having such a broad background, but then being able to help brands. Is there anything along the line that has helped you? I think something that you mentioned is in the way you organize, or maybe your process and how you're talking to customers has helped you. But what mindsets and skills have helped you? Number one, build your career, obviously build your business, but have also helped you in terms of understanding the customers that you're talking to and working with them.
So actually, I've thought about this, and when I was young, I really had a problem with conflict. I guess in my household, there were, no one ever raised their voice, kind of thing, and so when I had to say something difficult or there was an issue like that, I was sort of afraid that would create a conflict. So what I would do is I would practice in my mind, if I say it like this, and I tried to feel what the other person would feel, and then I would tweak it, kind of thing. And that sort of became this defense mechanism, sort of, or became this habit. And over time, I think I've gone past the not trauma, but and it's become a kind of superpower.
Yeah.
So when a company sort of says, we work with this kind of people for this kind of issue kind of thing, I sort of automatically, my shift into the customer and feel how it would feel, and then I can sort of say, but if you said it like this, and so there's a lot of gut feeling that comes from this, but it's also, I've worked with, dozens, if not hundreds of companies and startups, and you get, the feedback, and you sort of feel, and then I put some kind of theory on top of that, and then I created these canvases where you talk about these, your customer, what are they trying to accomplish? What are their issues? What are the moments where this is important? How do they, and to bring out these elements that help you then choose, what's important and how to describe the customer and things like that. But I think it's something that, I finally can use that in these interactions. I'll find that I'll be working, they tell a story and I say, oh, so if I rephrase blah, 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 and then they'll say, oh, damn, that was good. How can we, should have recorded that, just because, I'll tell it in a way where I feel that has an emotional impact on the person that's listening. And I think this emotion part of it is really important. Everybody talks about, speed and pixels and this and whatever and kind of comparison. But a lot of the decisions we take are, based on emotions, and how can you connect with those? It's not just solving the problem, it's you're no longer frustrated and you're proud and you're this or something, and that comes to play a lot also.
100%. And fantastic answer, and I totally agree. It's something that we always say, certainly in the sales world, is, I think it's 89% of sales are obviously made just on emotion. So how can you connect with that person to be able to drive that? So I'm going to use one of the examples you provided. What if you're working with these accountants that work with specific landscapers? When you're working with a client like that, how is it, or like, and for someone who may be in a field where they're not sure how to maybe get that emotional reaction, and I don't necessarily mean like, in a crazy way, but be able to make someone feel something, and have that connection to a brand or, to whatever it is that they're seeking. What are some ways that entrepreneurs can be able to help their stories have that element in how they want to convey their message when they're trying to tell a story of their brand?
So the first thing I would say is that most companies that I work with don't niche down enough. By default, companies are afraid to lose that potential one sale, so they want to be open and broad, and it ends up being a little bit vague, and could be for everybody. And so, sure, they'll still make sales, but it becomes a little bit generic. And I find that by niching down, and when I said, if you're an accountant, pick one, it doesn't necessarily matter which, and of course, if you have a particular affinity to one, well, great. Yeah. That commitment to a smaller group already creates emotion. If I say, I'm an accountant only for landscapers, if I'm a landscaper, I think, okay, someone cares about me. They chose to, and there's already something there. The other thing is, there's a mixture of people want to have an aspiration and they have a challenge. And sometimes it's more of one or more of the other. If my faucet's dripping, well, it's just a challenge. I mean, the aspiration might be, I want to, I don't know, but a lot of times, I mow lawns. So, well, my lawn's too long, so you cut it shorter. That seems pretty straightforward. But this is where people live. And they have, they're frustrated, their spouse is on their back, they're ashamed in front of their neighbor, and you can make them happy, you can make them proud, in all this in something that seems very practical. And so if you can identify, and this works in B2B too, people are frustrated, or they feel like they're held back, or they want to move forward, but it's not easy. All these things. Sometimes you sell because the person wants to be the hero of their company or team or something, or they they want to feel like they're an innovator, so they're choosing the solution that's a little bit more interesting, or there's all these things hidden in, and if you can tap into that, and and especially by niching down, it's easier because you can get a handle on those people. You don't want to niche down too much. Maybe if it's only independent consultants with white beards and fluffy cats, that might be that's not enough for a business.
Yeah.
But I feel that there is something there that does that.
Yeah, no, I totally get it, and I love how you approach that. It's something that I feel I continuously learn, especially even when, for example, like around the podcast and saying I'm creating a podcast for everyone, and when you try to do that, it doesn't work. You have to be able to really understand and focus on that niche and say, this is my audience. Here's who I know will get the most out of this, and how you understand it. And as you said, it's so important to really, really fine tune that. It really get that niche down so you understand who you're communicating to. So I love that point, and that's one of the challenges I think a lot of people have, and I certainly had when I first started, because I figured it would be, kind of spray and pray and hope people came in. But the more conversations I had, the more people who I got to connect with was where I really started to understand, okay, this is the types of conversations I want to have. These are the types of people I want to connect with. And I think here's the value that, the audience can get, because we're kind of in line and looking at that specific thing. So I love your
especially when there's 4 million podcasts out there.
Exactly.
And so people, they'll either they'll find some recommendation or a link or scroll through or do a search or something. And so if they they'll start with their identity, their aspiration, their need, and if that matches, it'll connect. And if it's sort of and otherwise there'll be another one that sort of will fit better. And then you won't fit anyone.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, with so much out there, especially when it comes to content, especially when it comes to stories, and I just want to more so relate this to kind of like the time we're in. We're in the age of information. We've got social media, we've got YouTube, AI is now coming out. And people's, and I want to relate this to people's attention span and the amount of stories they're probably getting every single day, right? And so when you have people with shorter attention spans, when you have so much content out there, do you have any advice for entrepreneurs on how to be unique in being able to story tell, or what are important elements to have in a story that can capture a person's attention when quite literally the entire world is fighting to get their attention and everyone else is also fighting to tell their story?
So I think a lot of companies fall into the attention, this trap of trying to be, to grab attention, but then for the wrong reason. We've all had that. We laughed at a commercial, but we don't remember what the brand was.
Yeah.
And so, if you grab people's attention, but it doesn't really connect, well, that wasn't the point. Attention isn't the point. It's kind of engagement. And so this idea, I guess, for me, is this: you lean into the fact that there's an authentic kind of connection to you. This idea that you recognize yourself. If I scroll through TikTok, and that those first few seconds, it's for me. I'll stop and I'll listen. And if it's just something crazy, I might just listen for the fun. But I won't connect on that level. And there's no real point in there are a lot of vanity metrics of people watching your reading your post or watching your video or things and all that. But if that doesn't transform into business, that's not the point. Marketing. Someone said, marketing that doesn't, actually increase your business is just arts and crafts. I mean, it's just for the fun of it. So, I mean, you can create visibility and things and all that, and it might work out over time. It doesn't mean that you have to, every little podcast or every little post you do is actually generating business. But somehow it creates, kind of persona for the brand. It creates this connection, and you've created something that at some point, the people will say, okay, now it's time. Not necessarily the fact that they have to click right away and then go through and then, it was just clickbait. But somehow also, the few companies that I found that were really successful in like digital marketing with all these channels and all these formats and all these things are the ones that sort of built a factory. Say, okay, here's our 20 ideas. We think those 3 have the most potential. We'll try those. We'll tweak them. We'll optimize them. The ones that work, we'll do more. The ones that don't, we drop, and then we'll take the number 4 and we'll try. And the ones that were working for the last 6 months don't work anymore, so we're going to try the other thing. And then they go at it as a kind of a scientific experiment that you're constantly working on optimizing. Some people feel that once I crack the code, I'm good and I can sit back and the money will roll in. Well, that doesn't really work, actually. I mean, it's a whole process. Consistency is important. I thought, I could never start a podcast just because I would think it would be great for the first 12 episodes, and then I think, and then I'll skip one and things, and you really have to commit to that thing, and that's a little bit of one of my issues personally is, I'll do videos on LinkedIn, and then, after a while, for some reason I skip one and things, and then I look back and it's been 6 months since I haven't posted anything, and that doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I admire your perseverance.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And I'll say definitely for me, probably being, as you mentioned, one of my biggest challenges is trying to get that consistency. And certainly when I started, you think it's going to be like a one and done, right? You're going to create one thing, or you see one trend, maybe it's like the water challenge or something, you're going to post that, you go viral, and it sticks. And probably, especially when I say how to make it, that's one of the things I also understood is like that continuous kind of journey, right? You don't just do one thing, you get great at it, and then you kind of walk away. It's a continuous process of refining yourself, iterating your processes, and continuously chasing. And it's one of the things I like to share with my audience is understanding of it's never going to be one thing and you're going to just walk away. You're going to have to continuously work at it. And if you see anyone that's good at it, or you get to meet great entrepreneurs like yourself, that's something that's already checked in, because some people feel like success is just one thing that they do right, and then you achieve that, you kind of are hands off. But it's like, no, actually, it's more work as you go along, right? Because
there's something when you feel there's a one-trick pony there that's that did this thing, and it. Some of these books come out, and there's a really interesting idea that would be a good blog post, but was spread out over 400 pages to try to make it into something, because that's all there's there.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, I can certainly say in relation to the consistency aspects, I'm fortunate, and it's something where I think I more so enjoy the conversations that I get to have with people and what I learn from them than I would say it's, having the ability to continuously make episodes, right? I got the opportunity to meet really great people. It's something I'm honestly interested in. I'm like, when I do my interviews, I'm genuinely interested in how you're doing what you do and what I can learn from you, right? Yeah.
And I think that's really important. If you can find the thing where you get joy out of doing it, improving, trying, continuing, and all that, you have a lot, better chance of actually, keeping going than if you sort of force yourself. I've tried doing cold outreach and things, and somehow being slapped in the face, repeatedly didn't quite fit.
Yeah.
And so I can get that.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, I would love to jump into that because certainly for you, being an entrepreneur, building your own business, you've certainly felt challenges, along your journey and to get to where you are. Have you faced, any expected challenges in your journey, whether personally in your career or as you build Standpoint, that you've had to overcome, and that you feel like have helped kind of define you, but then also helped you keep going?
I think so. So maybe two things. One is I think you need to dare more than you think. I think the risk of of daring is lower than people think. Should I jump? Should I quit? Should I try my thing? Should I go to my boss? And in several of my jobs before, I would go up and say, hey, we should be doing something different. And so I've created new departments, or created this. There was this merger where there was 87 task force for data and systems and programs, and nothing for the people. So I went up to the way, and I was down at the bottom of the totem pole. But I went up and said, hey, we have to do something, and I was to create this project. And sometimes I got that didn't work out, or you create maybe enemies or things like that. But overall, just being your authentic, doing what you feel is right, was one thing. I think connection is really important for me. In these last 10 years of being independent, I've met so many interesting people, and this posture of kind of generosity, with helping out, with contributing to others. I'll coach. I've coached entrepreneurs from migrant and refugee status to to help them integrate. As a volunteer, working in these things, or just other entrepreneurs to give tips, to be out there, and somehow at some point creating that ecosystem of connection. I'll invite people to my house and organize events and things where it doesn't create the next business opportunity, but then I look back and I'm teaching here and I'm doing that and I have this little project, and somehow all that comes together with new interesting connections, and that's helped quite a bit, and it also is part of the fun of it, and so if you can. If you can find the thing that helps and is also something you like, not everyone is out there meeting 100 people a day, kind of thing. But that was, I find that really interesting.
Yeah, it's beautiful how that works out. I think in terms of, as you said, being yourself, doing things that work for you, but you get to build that network and that ecosystem, and then that kind of reverberates its way around, right? Like out of nowhere, you've got a new opportunity, or now I know someone in Geneva, so maybe when I'm on a Euro trip, I can definitely stop by and have some coffee and share ideas. Do you know what I mean?
It's not, and you don't go into that connection saying, okay, let's
Yeah.
Carl, I'm sure he can get me something or something like that. It's sort of like, you go out with this generosity posture, and that's things come back.
Yeah, for sure. You've mentioned a few things. Obviously, your ability to be authentic, to stand up and do what you think is right, for sure, which I love. And then obviously you've talked about the fact that you're coaching, coaching businesses, coaching young entrepreneurs, working with migrants that are coming in along the way. And my question would be, what are some resources and support systems that have helped you as an entrepreneur, either improve your skill set? Like, have you had mentors along the way? Have you, I mean, obviously you've done a lot of education as well, but what sort of resources and support systems have helped you be successful? And if you're a young entrepreneur potentially wanting to get into business, what would you recommend is something young entrepreneurs should try and get into to help develop their skill set and even their ability to network and put themselves out there and take those risks?
So I do think I have gone back and I did a year-long program on category design because I thought it was interesting, and I studied storytelling, and then design thinking, and then I read and you try out the things, and somehow I found that the most expensive training programs I've done were actually the ones where then I thought, oh, no, I'll have to use that. You read a book and you think, oh, that's really interesting, and then you don't really apply it. But when you pay $10,000 for a training, you think, oh, okay, let's actually try that.
Yeah.
And there have been people along the way. When I became independent, one of the first steps was being a coach in a big startup incubator here in Geneva. And shout out to James Miners of Fongit, maybe he'll hear this. It was, there's a kind of a mentor thing, but it's also this role model of he is there to connect and to uplift others. And so you're in an event and and suddenly you're there. He's there with two people and say, hey, these two amazing people you should meet, kind of thing, and then applaud people's success, and this ongoing relentless positivity of connection and uplifting was really something that helped me along, building this idea of being independent and things. And so that was and so I think this idea of a mentor, there are programs for that. Sometimes as students, there can be a mentorship program linked to the university. I've done that a little bit as a mentor for the university here in Geneva. But their ask, you'd be surprised how people feel flattered that you reach out and ask for advice or help or something. I don't know if you've seen online, there's this rejection therapy thing. So basically it's you go and ask someone for a crazy thing with the whole point is they'll say no. Yeah. And so there's like the 100 days in a row. And then these people come out and say, 60, 70% of the time people said yes. But I went into the coffee shop. So I said, hey, can I come behind the counter and make my own coffee? And they say, sure. And they teach you how to make the coffee. And you think, yeah. Or this guy, went to stop someone in the street and say, hey, how about if we make matching tattoos? Yeah. And the guy said, well, I was just thinking of having a tattoo. Why not? And they end up with a matching tattoo. And some people, will back off or whatever. But this idea that it frees you of, people will say, no, you're not worse off.
Yeah, exactly.
But often you can create this connection by just going out there and asking. Yeah, that was the Amanda Palmer from the Dresden Dolls. I don't know if you know the band, the Dresden Dolls. You're too young for that, but she wrote this book called Ask, where she has this special relationship with her fans. When she, some of the tours she would make, she would sleep at fans' houses and do these things, and that created this. She was one of the first ones to do crowdfunding to create albums and things where she would ask, and people love that.
Yeah, I love that. No, it's so important. And certainly for me, in developing my career, in building anything, I've learned the importance of, number one, being able to, as you're saying, ask and not being afraid to ask for what you want. I feel like some people close themselves off from so much because they're afraid to do it. And whether it's fortunate or unfortunately for me, as I've mentioned, I work in sales, so you're constantly asking and you're constantly getting rejected. So it definitely does build that, whether it's that rigor or that thick skin, to be able to understand that it's a rejection, not take it personally. And something that I've done that really helps me is I chase the no. For someone to say no, because in some cases it saves me from having to continuously try and craft a message or wasting time trying to get to you. If it's a no, then I understand and I can refocus my attention. But this is something I learned from Gary Vee, actually, and he said, when you ask for something, you should know why you're asking, right? Don't come at it, make an ask for like a manipulative way, because some people say, I just need you to do this and this to get this. Or people will ask with the hope of getting the right answer. But if you're going to make an ask, you should know, where you stand, where the value is for that person, and what you want to get out of it. And that way, if it's a no, you're like, okay, fair enough, it's not for you. Or you can ask confidently saying, this is of value to you. So the importance of not being afraid to ask is quite valuable. Yeah.
And I think there's a second level at that getting to the no, is that a lot of people, they won't say yes, but they won't say no either. Because somehow you go to a company and they could get in trouble by accepting something that doesn't work out, but they could be in trouble by not taking the opportunity. So the safest route is to string you along.
Yeah.
We need more time to decide. Could you give us more information and things?
Yeah.
Where you just rather say, no is fine, but,
Exactly.
but maybe, this thing is a waste of everyone's time, and often it's for the wrong reason. It's going to be no, unless there's a miracle. But they don't. That commitment to the no is difficult.
Yeah, it's interesting that we live in that time where people are also afraid to say no, and I totally agree with that. But before, I just want to make sure we get some time to really talk about Standpoint, so and get a little bit more news about it. So could you tell us more about Standpoint, a little bit about the business, what problem you're trying to solve, and how you're helping customers, because we want to make sure people understand that.
So I'm an independent consultant, so I do have a company called Standpoint, and the idea is, so I have now specialized a lot in this idea of storytelling, which is, I could actually say, what I've specialized in is, brand positioning, and I have a tool that's storytelling that helps you clarify your positioning. And so you sort of, I've even seen that the fact that you build a story as a team. I had this company where I had 10 people and asked them write down what the company does, and I got 10 different stories. And so this idea that they come out with a shared story that sort of focuses their attention, it's for these people, and this is what we're delivering. I mean, creates this internally is really powerful also. So yeah, so what I do is I work sort of often with marketing department, or if a smaller company, sort of with the whole team, to step back, look at your company from the outside in. We often see it, all day long, you're trying to satisfy your customers and make your product better and this and that. It's all from the what you're doing. So this moment where you can step back and try to take your customer's standpoint is sometimes very transformative. Plus, you get this story structure that you can, each of those steps can be a slice in your website, and that defines how you're going to communicate. You can take a slice of it, you're in a networking event where you can have the short version, but it's still, I don't mow lawns. Homeowners are really frustrated, by, after coming home from work, doing gardening is really hard. So I take care of all that, and then they're proud when they have a barbecue with their friends. And that's a lot more engaging than say, I mow lawns.
Yeah.
And so, go to, so the website is standpoint.ch, because I'm in Switzerland, and CH is the extension for Switzerland. And so, leave me a message in my contact form, say you're coming from Carl's podcast, and I'll give you an hour of, let's talk about your brand. Let's talk, see where we can go, and, no commitment, just, I'm always interested in hearing stories of companies around the world, and maybe I can help.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Really appreciate that. And we'll definitely make sure we share the website and any links so you can be able to connect with John. And really cool. I love that, take the standpoint of your customers. I love the name. Definitely love how you're helping people. One of the last things I'd want to ask is, in business and in your career, what are some of the biggest lessons you think you've learned along the journey that have helped you in, being a better, whether it's founder, leader of a business, or even just a better person, getting to meet and work with so many different entrepreneurs?
I'll come back to empathy. I think that's that's the big one. Uh, when I say that I step into the customer's eyes to see the company, I can sort of see their company from the founder's eyes too. What are they trying to accomplish? What's the mission? And sometimes I think it's amazing. Sometimes I think, oh, okay. There's this idea of a bad good idea. It's the idea that you talk to all your friends, say, wouldn't it be great? And they all say, ooh, that would be cool. And then it goes nowhere. It's sort of like, wouldn't it be great to have this app where you can just click and then you can get together to drink beers, and wouldn't it be fun?
Yeah.
Creating a business out of that is really difficult. One more social media kind of community or something. Do people really need one more Facebook or something? And so to get into that thing, I really think it's it's this empathy and connection and openness to what they're trying to do, and that's. I sort of have this philosophy of radical honesty. I'd rather say secrets are really bad, and I'd rather say things and get it out of the way, and then to and sometimes it doesn't serve me. I'll say things that I'm struggling in my business or something, and when I should be out there standing strong or something. But I feel that overall that clarity and that sort of authenticity is makes it all better for everyone.
100%. I think that's one of the reasons I is certainly connected with you, because I'm the same way. And unfortunately, sometimes the truthful person is usually the most hated, because you're not afraid to be as honest, or at least share that, or not just trying to be nice. And I think it gives more clarity, and I think it's the realest perspective to have. So I'm with you on that. My final question for you would be, with everything that you've accomplished, what are you most proud of at this point?
I think being so if we stay on the professional level, I think I'll be 63 this summer.
Wow.
And I'm in a stage where I feel, hey, I'd love to keep doing this for as long as I can. I'm not looking forward to retirement, to finally, kind of thing. It's just to having created this kind of portfolio of activities. I teach and I coach and on different areas, and there's this diversity, meeting so many people, and that's. And I probably could be earning a lot more money in a corporate setting, but this. I think that joy and fulfillment is worth more than the money.
Yeah, that's beautiful, and that's awesome. It's been great to connect with you. I hope we can have another conversation, because I'd love to deep dive into maybe doing a case study or working on a story together, because I think that would be really cool. But I'll make sure that we share all the links about John. I just want to thank you so much for your time, jumping on with us, sharing your stories, giving us some insight into how you operate. But thank you so much for your time, John.
Well, thank you, Carl. This has been fun, and this has been surprisingly open and connected, and not just a professional thing. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, guys, and take care. Bye.